Today, for my Capstone video, I will be talking about horrendous natural evil. Before delving into this concept, I wanted to ask myself, what is the problem in natural evil? It is a question we ask of why does a good, all-powerful, all-knowing God allow bad things that do not stem essentially from human agency to affect his treasured creatures? Today we'll be talking through 4 perspectives. The first perspective is Kate Ballard. Kate Ballard is a mom to her son and a wife to her husband. She is battling currently a stage 4 colon cancer. She is questioning simplistic explanations for suffering. The key ideas of takeaway from her TED Talk is that she opening with the idea that the prosperity gospel, if you're good, good things will come back. So Ballard argues that many religions and cultural narratives promise that good behavior and faith will guarantee a good life. So for her and many others, this isn't the case. This isn't the perspective of the prosperity gospel that happens in real life. So after Ballard's cancer diagnosis, she finds that this idea for life collapses. She rejects the idea that suffering and pain will always have a clear explanation, or the result is from a personal failure in life. Instead, we should be looking at the presence of love, even in hard times and good times. She even finds that these formulas for life of, it's just a road bump in life, it is just another step that you need to take, everything happens for a reason. She finds that this is not the case. So she talks about delving deeply into that virtue does not equal success. She came to realize anything good about her could not save her from this. It couldn't help her with her battle. But instead, we should be asking why bad things happen to us. We need to revert our thinking to asking, when bad things happen, what can I do? With this thought, we should respond with mercy and love. So what can we do? We can be compassionate for those who are suffering rather than trying to fix or explain their problem. And encourage a response of weeping for those who weep, offering mercy, and don't blame God for the suffering, feel love. She explained there's different statistics in the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation that they all have the same theme of all feeling love. When she felt like she was going to die, she wasn't angry, she felt loved. Her own suffering felt like she was feeling the suffering of others. Our second response is David Bentley Hart. David Bentley Hart is the tsunami and theodicy. So the key ideas that I brought from Hart's perspective is he's trying to find it's hard to justify every instance of natural evil inside one plan that God created. This would make him look wrathful instead of a good and loving father. Hart reminds us that this does not disapprove or undermine a belief in a good God. So in Hart's article, he looks at non-believers' arguments on faith and Christians' attempts to explain the tsunami as a part of God's plan. So what is Hart's response? And I looked over the view of suffering and natural evil. So Hart does not think disasters are divine punishments or from God himself. Rather, it is a creation itself that is out of harmony with God. We are distorted by the fall. Therefore, this is not a true expression of God's will. According to Hart, the knowledge that suffering and death is considered in themselves have no ultimate meaning at all. Hart's response of the necessary suffering is he's critical of people trying to attempt to rationalize natural disasters by saying they must serve some cosmic purpose of the unknown. So the article that he does not agree with is just a perspective people that believe this is that God is the balancer of accounts and that we must suppose that the suffering of those innocents will bear spiritual fruit for themselves and for all mankind. Now Hart does not believe this at all. He thinks that Christians should not have to find a meaning in suffering to justify disasters a part of God's plan. Instead, we want to believe that God will overcome and abolish evil entirely. That we can find comfort in when we witness suffering, because we should not see the face of God, but the face of his enemy, and trust that God one day he will raise her up and wipe away all her tears from her eyes. And when I really found this perspective intriguing, because in the beginning it's a bit hard to understand, and then when you see that he's not even saying God's bad, God is looking in the eyes of evil that's in the world. So being able to see that it's evil doing these problems and God is trying to overcome that is just completely shattering when you really look at this idea. So the ending part that really put this into perspective for me is that Hart states, "And there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, no crying, nor any more pain, for the former things will have passed away. And he that sits upon the throne will say, Behold, I make all things new." The next perspectives we're going to be looking at is C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis thinks Christianity illuminates the world like a rising sun, but there are shadowlands because our minds are so small. So he kind of believed that our perception of suffering is an intellectual problem, that we have a preconceived idea of what Christ is like, and we need to hold on to a Christ who suffered just as suffering Christ holds on to you. So instead, Lewis treats any natural evil as a partial understanding of the bigger picture, insisting we see enough to trust in God, but we don't need a reason to see the picture of every earthquake, cancer, or tsunami. So in the video, Lewis's takeaway is that natural evil is definitely real and painful, but we cannot fully explain it. But it does fit within this bigger picture that we see of God creating a law-governed and stable world for human freedom because he sent his only son to suffer, and he resurrected together. So that makes our sense of situation, and it gives hope rather than a complete intellectual solution. God gave us hope for this world to come. So the turning point for this argument is Lewis wished, for at least Lewis, that he wished he could suffer instead of his wife, bear her suffering, and this is kind of a reflection of the cross. In his words, true love is willing to bear another's suffering. So God's true love for us, he bared our suffering for our sins and for his world. So Lewis sees this world as fallen since we don't live in harmony with God yet. So our natural order is not originally what God intended from the start, but that is why he sent his only son to bear the weight of our sins. Mark McGarth emphasizes for Lewis that a crucified Christ shows that God is not indifferent to suffering, but entered it in for us and with us. Next is the Stoic perspective of Marcus Aurelius. So his ideas are a little, I think, a good amount different because he was in a completely different time. He was a Roman emperor, a Roman warrior, so his perspective of kind of being unemotional at that time may not be exactly what today, but the insight from him is still very good. So he does not think that there is a natural evil, but instead what happens in nature is neither bad or unjust, but are the part of the logos of order. So things like disease, disasters, pain are therefore not evil, but the mind of a person that is emotional, and if it conflicts with the reason, virtue is evil. So according to Marcus in Meditations, suffering is inevitable in the world, like dying, which is the body's problem. Or it affects the soul, but the soul can choose not to be affected, preserving its own serenity and tranquility. All our decisions, urges, desires, and aversions lie within. No evil can touch them. So I kind of separated this into two ideas of what Marcus thinks about natural evil, of what is natural evil to him, and what is a nature that he'll keep referring to. So first, I believe that Marcus, for Marcus at least, an event that harms a person is only if it corrupts their character and virtues. If the mind keeps its judgment aligned with virtue, no external force like natural evil can hurt you. In Meditations, Book 6, lines 1 and 3, nature is pliable and obedient, and the logos that governs it has no reason to do evil. Look inward, don't let nature or value of anything elude you. So what is nature to your list that we kept hearing? So as in class, I'm pretty sure that nature is the living and rational order of the universe, which could be the providence or logos he speaks about. So believing in this would not just be a cause and effect of good and bad, but just it happened because of the rational order was the will. Meditations, Book 4, lines 8 and 9, it can ruin your life, and only if it ruins your character. Otherwise, it cannot harm you inside or out. It was for the best. Nature had no choice but to do it. The bottom of nature had to do it, so it wasn't because of a bad God. It was because of the logos we live in. As Marcus says, it hurts us if we deem it to. So the agreements that I see between Ballar's Hart and Lewis is that suffering is the hardest challenge to faith. Ballard talks about her life was perfect until she received a phone call as a young mom that she is battling stage 4 cancer. Her whole talk is about shaping how disruptive and suffering this is. Hart refers to the tsunami that happened and how that's a brutal test to the idea of a good and loving God. Lewis and McGarth video treats suffering as a shadow land in our mind that we end up questioning our faith for him, especially after his wife's death. We cannot fully understand natural evil. Even Hart says that as Christians, we must admit we cannot see a moral logic in events like tsunamis, trying to prove that every horror fits a perfect plan. Ballard speaks on not wanting to live with cancer as a lesson, but insisting that some things just don't need to make sense. Instead, we are loved because her own suffering felt like she could feel the suffering of others. We're not all-knowing, so events shouldn't make sense. We should say we are committed to our good and loving God. So we do know from all four of these perspectives, and that is that natural evil is real. Ballard with cancer, Hart reflects on natural disasters. Lewis sees suffering as a hardest challenge to faith. Marcus reflects on the loss and death as an unavoidable part of human life. So the parallel feeling of suffering between Kate and Lewis is that Ballard doesn't end her talk with a solved problem, because she is still fighting, but she tells us about a way of life, accepting, telling about truth and pain, and holding on to the moment of love and grace. As she said, Kate responded to learning to live and love without counting the cost. While Lewis realizes that his need for wanting to suffer instead of his wife mirrors the cross. Jesus bears the suffering for his beloved children. In the video, McGarth says, Lewis makes the important point that Christ's suffering and death shatters inadequate ideas of God. The differences that I see is pretty much a divide between faith versus virtue. So Ballard, Hart, and Lewis, they're all kind of in the Christian perspective and sees natural evil as something that God does not stand against and will redeem. They reflect back on Christ bearing the weight of the sins of the world for humanity. They all do see a little bit different, but it kind of all revolves around that same pattern. While Marcus is a Stoic, and natural evil is kind of just the logos and natural order of the world. It needs to be accepted by an individual to meet with the inner virtue of character rather than having any theological meaning. Through this, in meditation, Marcus writes to himself every day to be able to have his mind under his own control and to accept what is not under his control. What I agree with and what I can resonate most with is Kate's talk. It does kind of resonate with me because my dad, when I was younger, he was fighting about stage 4 esophageal cancer from when I was 5 until I was 11. Stage 4 cancer is one of the most rarest type of cancers in the world. About 1% of cancer diagnoses revolve around that each year. In the American Cancer Society, the lifetime risk is 1 in 32, and 1 in 5 men diagnosed survive. So how she puts this into devastation, into perspective, is what it is really like to receive life-changing news. So, as she said, you ask yourself, why me? Why her? Why my dad? Why anyone? Into a matter of statement. And you kind of reflect back on everything you did in life. As she said, I had a perfect life. I have an amazing son. I have a job, my husband, her house. Everything was going great until one day this news can completely turn your world upside down. And that's what it was like for my family, too. What caused this to happen? They are good people. Why would God want to take them from the world? Instead of asking why does this happen to me, just like her dad, they both took it and wanted to fight for their child and family. Just like Kate, she said, I have a son. My dad said, I have a daughter. Together, they both realized they're not letting this beat them. I learned from my dad and Kate that yes, bad things can happen to good people, but at any given moment, tomorrow is not promised. So, tomorrow isn't promised. Kate describes how people tried to comfort her with explanation of reason, that it's just like a roadblock in life and it can be a life lesson. Instead, I like how she encouraged a different response of allowing the grief and telling the truth that yes, this will be a hard fight, but you can do it. In this moment, she felt loved. As Kate said, when the feeling resides like the tides, they will leave an imprint. She felt loved from the people around her, that she knew that God loved her with the same love. She can dwell in this question of it remaining unanswered and trust in God's love. So we always don't need, when we're trusting in God and learning, you don't always need to explain an illness as a life lesson. You don't always need to have a reason. But having many people in your life and close friends constantly praying for you and for their health through any chemotherapy and operation is exactly what we need in life. C.S. Lewis is another perspective that I really like. C.S. Lewis' idea is more geared towards the idea that we live in a fallen creation. I feel like as a believer, this is the argument that is easy to agree with. Lewis describes Christian knowledge as like a rising sun, but we cannot expect to see full clarity because we are humans. McGarth said, we are frail and there are limits to our vision. One day, Lewis argues, things will become clearer to us, including the place of suffering within creation. As Lewis alluded to, he didn't really maybe think in this perspective before until his wife passed away. He moved more to the idea of a fallen world in Christ. I do believe it is comforting the way he described us as one with Christ, that we are not alone in suffering, and how McGarth emphasized that this crucified Christ shatters inadequate ideas of God. God entered the world to bear suffering and is not something that lies beyond the experience of the presence of God. Is what McGarth said. So why I kind of like Kate's over the idea of C.S. Lewis is that I don't think Kate really offered a clear solution to the problem with suffering. For me, everyone suffers differently in the world, so anyone can reflect on this. While I do feel like Lewis wants to keep kind of bearing the weight that we live in a broken order, so this evil is looking at Christ, and Christ came to us to bear the suffering, but it is our own intellectual problem that we have a preconceived idea of what Christ is like. Both of them together, I do really like the concept of both natural evil. They both have some flaws in their argument, but that is just my opinion on what I believe. That is all that I have for today, so thank you for listening, and my references are the next slide over. Thank you.